Good morning. Happy Sunday. I'm sorry that we're not all together to worship. I think that it's important that we all stay safe. I know that our street is crazy, crazy ice. Folks have abandoned their cars halfway up the street and just walked because it's gotten so bad. Um, so I hope that y'all are in a better situation than that and able to get out and get whatever you need. And I've been praying for all of you this week, that you'll have what you need and to be well. Um, so I wanted to share just a quick devotional this morning. I will save our sermon on the temptations of Jesus until next week. But I've been thinking a lot about neighbors this week. I'm sure you can understand why, being trapped in the house. But it led me to think about the greatest commandment. The greatest commandment is a verse that comes in Matthew 22 as Jesus is speaking to the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and they are testing him. They're asking him, what do you believe is the greatest commandment? So I'm just going to read this little section from Matthew 22, verses 34, through 39. Hearing that Jesus silenced the Sadducees, the Pharisees got together. One of them, an expert in the law, tested him with this question: Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Jesus replied, Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. And the second is like it: love your neighbors yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. So, a couple of things about these verses. The first is, you may know that he's quoting a couple of places in the Old Testament. The first quote comes from Deuteronomy 6:5, which he quotes pretty much word for word, saying, Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. That comes at the end of the Shema, which is a prayer in Hebrew. That they would have prayed every day. And so this chapter of Deuteronomy is extremely well known to the Pharisees. And it may be exactly what they expected him to say. Of course, the greatest commandment, it comes right on the tail end of the Shema. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And so love him with all your heart, all your soul, all your mind. The second part takes it a little bit further, and it might be the part that they didn't expect. Here, Jesus is quoting from Leviticus 19:34. What I find interesting is that the original text is actually a little different. Here's what it says. In Leviticus 19:34, it says, The alien living with you must be treated as one of your native born. Love him as yourself, for you were aliens in Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So here, Jesus is quoting this part of the law, and this is in the midst of Leviticus where there's law after law after law, to say, really the heart of this is that you love the people around you. You love the people, anybody who is in your borders, because you were the person who was foreign once. And so you are called to also love those who are foreigners within your midst. Now, how the Pharisees might have heard this is an interesting question, because who were the foreigners in their midst? The Romans. And the Romans are not, nice people. They're the people that came in and conquered. They're the people who are taking over. They're the people who they want gone. Which is an interesting thought experiment, why Jesus quoted this particular passage and why the quote says neighbor instead of the alien in your midst. There's a lot that we could probably unpack there. But the other thing that I really appreciate about these verses is that what Jesus is doing is he's defining the spirit of the law, right? It's not just about what the individual's laws are. It's about what they're all pointing towards. What's the purpose of them? And so, you know, this happens with scripture. We don't like to say so, but there are verses that kind of help define and explain other verses and help us understand an overall intention, and therefore, in a sense, become greater than. So when we talk about the greatest commandment, a little part of us maybe wants to say, well, all of God's commandments, we shouldn't choose. But the reality is that this points to a deeper intention behind all of the other commandments. In the sense that, if we understand, if we're in line with the Spirit of God and with the Spirit of God's will for us, and with who Jesus is, then we're going to naturally love God and love the world the way that God commands. This idea of we're living towards something instead of we're just being restricted from not doing the things we're not supposed to do, right? So anyways, I've always appreciated these verses. This week, they became particularly important to me as I kind of had a little struggle with some of my neighbors. So here's what happened. It's Monday morning, as you know, snow everywhere. We have a collie. She's got long fur. She loves being out in the snow. So Matt and I head out into the snow to play with the dog. And as we're leaving the house, we notice that our next door neighbors are trying to clean off their cars, and they're doing so with a broom. And one of them is like using their nails to try to like get under the ice to pull the ice out off of their windshield. And so obviously, I know that's not the best idea. So I go and I get our ice scraper and I offer it to them. Now, they only speak Spanish. Thankfully, I can speak some Spanish, though we never had a unit on ice scrapers or anything really technical about cars or winter during my Spanish classes. So I'm lacking a lot of vocabulary. And so I kind of just say, do you want to use this? Because I can say this, even though I don't know how to say ice scraper. I give it to them. And we continue playing with the dog. Matt says, wait a second, you should probably let them know that we want that back and to just put it by the door. And suddenly I got kind of shy. This happens sometimes. Speaking Spanish, it's not my native language, obviously. It was early in the morning. I was like, I'm feeling kind of shy. I don't really want to go tell them that. I'm sure that they know to give us back the ice scraper. They'll leave it somewhere. They'll just put it by the mailbox or by a car or by our door. They'll be fine. As you can probably guess, it was not as I expected. So anyways, we get back, and there's still no ice scraper by the door. Throughout the morning, I keep on checking by the door. I'm starting to get a little annoyed. I'm also feeling kind of bad about being annoyed because it's just an ice scraper. And, I'm a Massachusetts girl. I went to college in Massachusetts. I didn't have an ice scraper then. I used bowls, plates, used credit cards. I mean, I know I can be scrappy. I can do it. But it was the principle of the thing, right? Like, I gave you an ice scraper, but I'm your next door neighbor. You want to have a good relationship with me, I think. You would want to give that back to me, I think. You would understand that that's not a gift, I think. And so I'm thinking about it. And then, the more I think about it, I'm like, well, but Matt suggested that I should probably say something, but I was too shy to do so. So maybe it's it's not all their fault. Maybe I didn't clarify. So later that day, I see that there's some folks out clearing off the driveway. It's not the same folks that I lent the ice scraper to, but they live in the same house. Okay, there's like a couple of apartments, I think, in the house. Um, so, but I'm like, I figured they all know each other. They live in the same house. So I just walk over to them and I say, hey, I lent my ice scraper to somebody in your house earlier this morning. And I was kind of wondering if I could just get that back. Whenever, and by the way, I'm trying to explain all this in Spanish. I still haven't looked up how to say ice scraper. So I'm just describing it, I guess. But anyways, I'm like, and whenever, you can just leave it next to my door, and so they seem to understand. I hear one of them explaining to somebody else that this so and so had brought an ice scraper. I'm like, okay, good. They get it. That night, I check, still no ice scraper. In fact, the whole next day, no ice scraper. And at this point, my judgment is really hard to keep in check. I'm pulling on the scriptures as much as I can. I'm like, love your neighbor as yourself. You know, Jesus says, somebody asks for your shirt, give them your tunic. Also, this is my tunic, just it's okay. Give it up. It's fine. But I can't help but think I might not want to loan things to my neighbors in the future, right? They might not be people that I can trust to return my stuff. So Wednesday comes around. Matt and I once again are leaving the house to let the dog out to go play. As we leave the house, our neighbors, the original one who I'd loaned the ice scraper to, comes directly out of his house and straight towards us. It's like he was waiting for us to come out. And he says, your ice scraper. Or he says something, which I don't remember what the word is, that I assume meant your ice scraper, because he looks right at me and then he waves over to his car. So I walk over to his car with him and he pulls out 2 ice scrapers, ours and a new one. And I'm like, what is happening? He gives me our ice scraper and he says, it broke. It broke while we were using it. I felt really bad and I didn't want to give you it back without also giving you this new one, which I bought for you. So here I am, of course, like egg all over my face, like, oh my gosh, I didn't want him to go through all that trouble. I didn't want him to spend money on something for me, but I'm so grateful because it does mean that, okay, these are neighbors that I can trust. And maybe they were just too nervous to say that earlier. Maybe they just really wanted to have time to explain. The next day, Thursday, another person in their house is driving up our icy hill and he gets stuck. You know how that happens on the ice when you spin your wheels and then your car gets like into a divot and you can't get out. This has happened. And so I notice our guy, our ice scraper guy, out there with a shovel, picking at the ice to, make a place where the car can get some traction and get up the hill. And so there's a bunch of folks out there, but there's only one shovel. So I go out with 2 shovels and I call Matt out. Matt goes out and helps them pick ice, and somebody else uses another shovel. And it takes us at least half an hour to get this guy up the hill, like 50 feet, because he keeps on getting a little ways and then getting stuck on the ice and then needing to be bailed out. And so this has happened multiple times to get him up the hill. And of course, I'm trying to like translate in Spanish. I don't know a lot of technical words about winter or cars in Spanish, so now I know to do some research. Um, and so we're having, just a grand old time. But one of the other neighbors, one of the guys that I had asked on Monday for my ice scraper back, pulls me aside and he says, "By the way, your ice scraper broke." And I'm like, "I know, but your guy, you're in your house. He gave me a new one." And he was like, "Oh, good." He was like, "I felt so bad. You asked about your ice scraper and it broke and I didn't know what to do." I was like, so I know what it feels like to be shy to talk to somebody who has a language barrier. And I also know what it feels like to feel really odd being um in a place that is not your home, or that is your home, but that is a really different culture than you're used to. Um, when I was in college, I went to Mexico and I lived there for several months. The first 2 weeks, I was by myself. I didn't have my American teammates didn't join me for the first 2 weeks, and so I was even after just 2 weeks, I was extremely lonely. I had a lot of people around me. They were all super nice. They were very hospitable. And yet I felt very alone because I was in a different culture and it felt so far from anything familiar. And in a way that was more lonely than even COVID. And so it gives me some compassion to think about what our immigrant neighbors really go through. I mean, they go through a lot of challenges in general with, um, trying to get through the immigration process is hugely difficult. And there are just less opportunities. There can be a lot of stress. They can end up in a lot of really difficult, hard labor jobs and all of that. But really also just being in a culture that's not your own can be kind of scary. And it kind of took me a whole week of interacting with my neighbors to realize, as shy as I was about speaking Spanish around them, they were also kind of scared of me. Me, I'm not scary. I don't think so, but um that what I thought about them really mattered to them. And it mattered so much that they actually kind of didn't communicate in a way that was helpful. And sometimes we do that when we're scared. Um, we are more likely to feel uncertain and to say less and communicate less and feel more awkward. And sometimes other people interpret that as being standoffish, or inconsiderate. And that can go both ways. So, anyways, I've learned a lot this week, but it made me think a lot about what it means to be a neighbor, and especially to think about what it means to be a literal neighbor. When we talk about who is my neighbor, we often think about the Good Samaritan and this idea that a random person on the side of the road could be your neighbor. Anybody is your neighbor. But this week, as we've been stuck on a hill in the ice with just our literal neighbors, the people who live next to us, it's really made me consider, what does it look like to love my neighbors, like the people who live next to me, the people that I have maybe nothing in common with except for that we chose to live on the same street. And what does it mean to be a good citizen of this neighborhood? What does it mean to be a witness to God's kingdom where I'm living? All of those questions have been swirling around in my mind this week, and it's given me a different perspective. It's made me wonder about the people across the street, wonder, who are they? Wonder, about, what if somebody on my street has been alone this whole time? In fact, just yesterday as we were walking, I saw a guy come out and knock some icicles off of his porch and kind of give us a wave. And I didn't really pay a lot of attention, but then it occurred to me, I thought, maybe he came out just as we were passing by because he wanted somebody to talk to. Maybe he's been inside by himself this whole time. I don't know. And you don't know until you ask. And I can be kind of shy, which I know is hard to believe, but sometimes it feels a little hard to ask, and a little bit easier to just kind of stay in our own little world, especially when we've gotten home and we've been out in the world all day and dealing with all of those people all day. But a time like this week, when you're really stuck with the people that live next door to you, really makes you think how important it is to know and to love the people that you're around. So that's my challenge to you this week, to take some time to get to know your neighbors, your literal neighbors. Maybe you've got some neighbors that you do know and some that you don't. Maybe you know the people right next to you, but not across from you. Maybe you've had neighbors that you were really good friends with and then they moved, and it was like a lot of effort to get to know these new people that moved in. Maybe you feel like your neighbors are inconsiderate. Maybe you don't get along. Whatever it is, I want to encourage you to continue to pray for them. If nothing else, learn their names and pray for them. And God can use that to guide you and how you can love them in the future. So that's my challenge to you this week. I hope that you are all warm and well. Continuing to pray for you, and I look forward to seeing you next week. Take care. Bye.